Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We've got so much we're going to do today. If you're watching a video before we're done, good footage from yesterday's appearance by Kirby Smart at that Peach Bowl. They do this celebrity golf event every year. They raise a bunch of money for charity. Kirby playing for his family foundation. We'll give you some video of that later on. I think this is kind of fun. We'll do that. We'll also debate quarterbacks around college football. That will be fun. There is news out there about a former Georgia player in the transfer portal. We'll give you that. But I want to begin today by talking about one of those things in which, hey, at one point in time, it sort of maybe seemed like Kirby Smart might be kind of like behind the times. And instead, in actuality, he may have been ahead of the curve, something that Kirby Smart recently ranted about. Perhaps that rant now proves prophetic. We'll tell you why here coming up. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I love a good Kirby Smart rant. That's always good fun, easy content. People kind of like that sort of thing. Smart kind of gets passionate about certain topics. You just fire the clip, you let it play, and it kind of does the work for you. Sometimes we like that. But sometimes these rants become more than just emotional outbursts. Sometimes they actually kind of prove to be a little bit prophetic. We're going to give you an example of that here coming up in a moment. And I feel like when it comes to Kirby Smart, there's a lot of this where at times it almost seems like, well, maybe Kirby's a little bit behind the times. But actually, when you watch events play out, sometimes, like a lot of successful leaders, Smart's ideas and his viewpoint, his perspective actually ends up being kind of ahead of a trend every now and then. I'll give you an example of something completely different. Then we'll talk about what's going on here right now. If you want to go back to prior to Georgia winning its 2 national championships under Smart, and really even kind of pre-pandemic, think about early years of Smart, 2018, 2019. The big knock on Kirby at the time was Kirby's a pretty good defensive coach, and he's kind of gotten to a certain level by playing defense and running the football. But if he wants to win national championships, he's going to have to become more like the other programs that were having success. And we have said this many, many times. One of the most interesting things that I think has occurred during the Kirby Smart era, that at the time there was a very big difference between kind of Kirby's prevailing philosophy, at least we thought, and the very best teams in college football at that given moment. You had Joe Burrow at LSU. They're scoring like 50 points per game. You had like Tua Tagovailoa as the Alabama quarterback. There was also a period of time in which they were scoring in the very high 40s. Clemson had Trevor Lawrence. That it seemed like college football was being taken over by the not just 40-point per game offenses, but some of these teams were like pushing towards like 50 points per game on average. And Georgia, by comparison, just didn't seem to be as invested on the offensive side of the ball. And it seemed like Kirby was kind of too set in his ways, too stuck with his kind of preconceived notions. And if he didn't evolve, he was going to not ever have that national championship success. Now, the truth is the Georgia offense did get better over time. But also in addition to that, and I think you'll join me in saying this, that college football also kind of evolved too, that a lot of this kind of stuff sort of goes in cycles. And we did have a cycle for a while where it seemed like every year these college football offenses were just unlocking various levels of achievement, and it just seemed like those numbers were going to keep going up and up and up. But in recent years, that trend has reversed itself. The defense has been more in vogue again. You don't really see anywhere near as many teams averaging 40 points per game as you used to. That the ability to run the ball, the ability to play defense, the sorts of things that have kind of always mattered to Kirby Smart, in addition to being good on offense, but those kind of deeply held convictions about what football is, the sport at large has actually started to look more like that again. It's an example of what once appeared to be Kirby Smart sort of behind the times. By the time the evolution took place, well, Kirby was actually ahead of the curve. He was preaching defense before other teams were. But now, whether it be Ohio State, Michigan, obviously the 2 championships for Georgia, the defense has been a major part of those equations for why those teams have won. That's just what it is sometimes for Kirby. By staying consistent and committed to his principles, oftentimes he's ahead of what the rest of the sport's going to be chasing after just a few months after that. We maybe have another example of that here today. I was thinking about this. If you want to go back to right when spring practice began for Georgia, there was a big kind of, this is not as much of a rant as Smart has gone before. Obviously when you go like halftime, some of these leaked, audio clips, things like that, those are true fiery rants, and they're filled with expletives, and he's peeling the paint off the wall. This isn't quite so much a rant in that regard, but it is one of those things where sometimes you say kind of get on your soapbox a little bit. Kirby did kind of get on his soapbox a little bit about what he wants to see from his team, both during this particular spring practice that just concluded for Georgia, and you would also say kind of overarching for the entire program as well. The thing that when Smart looks at a Georgia football player, he wants to see about that Georgia player. I thought Smart really gave you some great, very honest, very candid detail about that earlier during spring practice for Georgia. Let's go back and revisit this, then I'll explain why it's important again today. This is Kirby Smart.
Yeah, I want to see the fire. I want to see the passion, the energy. I want to see who wants to be a good football player, who really cares about this game. Like, they care more about the game than they do about their NIL revenue stream. Like, if you really, really, really care about the game and you want to be good, it doesn't matter about any kind of money. It matters how I play the game. And more we're seeing across college football, the purest, the ones that care about the game the most, play the hardest. And usually the team that plays hardest wins. I know everybody thinks it's just whoever's more talented, but there's a whole lot to how hard you play and how much you care about it. So my goal is to find out, how hard do you want to play? How much do you really want to be great? Because if you do, it'll show by how you practice.
So to a certain kind of person, and I would put myself in this group, I think many of you would put yourself in this group. What Smart says there, take away the fact that we're Georgia fans. I've got the Georgia G on my shirt today. Take away the fact that we're Georgia fans. We're just people observing football and people participating in life. There's a certain kind of person, you and I may put ourselves in that group, that just sort of sounds like common sense. That just sort of sounds like, yep, that's about right. That's what you would expect a leader of men to say in a situation like that. It just sort of makes sense. But there is another kind of person, many of these people exist in the media, they actually viewed what Smart said there as kind of controversial. There was some response after that remark by Smart of, who does the highest paid coach in college football think he is to tell these other guys not to worry about their money when Smart is making as much money as he's making? There's a certain kind of person that actually viewed Smart's statement there as something somewhat controversial, or at least worthy of criticism, critique. There was some of that out there. I would suggest that some of those that may have took a dim view of Smart's statement about, I want to see how much you love football, I want to see that you're about more than just the money that you would make. Some of the people that didn't like Smart saying that back in the spring, I would maybe humbly suggest they might owe Smart a little bit of an apology here today. Because what Smart was saying he wanted to see from his team back in March when spring practice began, we now have evidence to believe that football teams all across the country and all across the world are also wanting to see from their players as well. And we would say the NFL draft is proof of that. Now, I'm going to mention just briefly the hottest topic in the football world over the course of the last week, but we are not going to spend any time on this topic in particular. We're just going to use it as an example of this. Everybody knows what has gone on with Shedeur Sanders, and you've probably heard so much about that you are now tired of hearing about Shedeur Sanders. Me understanding that, me trying to reflect the mood of the audience, I'm only going to briefly mention Shedeur here and very deftly kind of move on to the next part of this because I want to keep the focus where it needs to be on Kirby Smart saying, listen, I want players who are about more than just money. And evidence in the aftermath of the Shedeur Sanders fiasco with the NFL draft that a lot of NFL GMs, a lot of NFL personnel men are now also saying the same thing, that what Smart says matters to him, the NFL also says matters to it, and therefore Smart's words kind of prove prophetic on this. And I want to play a couple of clips here that sort of prove this. Do you know who Tiki Barber is? Barber, the former New York Giants running back, played college at Virginia. Now he's a radio host on the big New York sports radio station known as WFAN. And in the aftermath of the Shedeur Sanders thing, and this is not about Shedeur, this is about a bigger idea than just one player. In the aftermath of that, Tiki Barber, I want you to hear this yourself. We're going to play you two clips here. And I want you to listen to how much what Tiki says, the NFL says that it wants. I want you to listen to how much this sounds like what Kirby Smart says he wants from Georgia players. And if you're a Georgia fan, you want to take a lot of comfort in this. That Smart, by being, having the courage of his conviction, sticking to his principles, all of a sudden the football world, perhaps once again, is kind of moving in his direction. Here is the former New York Giant Tiki Barber on WFAN.
This is maybe because of NIL, and trust me, guys, we know that Shedeur Sanders, whether via his father or via the ridiculous amount of NIL money that he made, he got paid, right? Like a lot over the last couple of years. And Jay Glazer said something interesting, and it was one of his posts on. I saw it on Instagram. I'm sure he did it on every platform. That said, it used to be that there were flags thrown at kids coming out of college for 1, injury, 2, character issues. But now there's a third one, and it's basically doesn't love football. And that can come in a couple of ways. Like, I'm just here because I'm good at this. I don't love it. I don't want to be great. I'm just good at this, so that's why I'm doing it. Or I don't need to grind to go get paid. Like the NFL is one of the few sports where unless you're drafted in the top 15, right, you got to earn getting paid. Yes. you just don't get paid. You don't just show up and like, hey, I'm a great prospect and I'm going to get called up, and then once my arbitration runs out, they're going to pay me some guaranteed contract and I'm going to be set for the rest of my life.
You'd be cut within a year.
You have to earn it in the NFL. And a lot of these kids have come into the NFL rich. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean,
I'm rich.
Right, exactly. I'm rich.
So expletive out that last little part. But doesn't that sound like Kirby Smart? Kirby says, if you're all about NIL, if that's the main concern to you, then we don't want you. We need guys that want football. I don't mind you getting paid. I don't mind you getting rich playing this game. In fact, I hope you do. But if that's all you care about, if you don't want to grind, if you don't really love the game, you just appreciate the fact that you've got talent, then you're probably not a good fit for us. That's what Smart would have said. And that seems really prophetic now that the NFL is apparently, according to Jay Glazer, the Fox analyst, Tiki Barber, the Giants running back on WFAN, sort of saying the same thing. Very, very similar words to what we've heard Kirby Smart use before, and for what it's worth, Tiki Barber was not done.
I think there's starting to become this little thing to watch. The kids come in and they don't love it. They don't love the grind. They don't want to grind because they're already paid. And they think that, this $4 or $5 million that they have coming out of college is all they're going to need in their life. And they might be right, unless they start buying Ferraris and, iced up chains and everything else. But this is something to watch with kids who sometimes come off as entitled. And if you looked at any of the social media of Shedeur Sanders over the last 2 years, trust me, you see him driving a Bentley. You see him wearing ice out the wazoo. You see him on every social media, post, commercial post. Does he love the game? And if that's a question, teams are increasingly not going to take you. Gabe, that's my best guess of why he fell.
So once again, much, much bigger than just Shedeur Sanders, who by now you're probably tired of. Tiki Barber says these NFL teams are trying to investigate. They're trying to examine, do you love the game? Do you want to play for more than just a paycheck? Do you have, Smart says, do you have fire? I mean, Tiki comes right to the line of saying, hey, do you have fire, passion, and energy? I mean, how many times we hear Kirby Smart, kind of just put that in their face over and over again? I want to see guys that have fire, passion, and energy. Well, Tiki came just this close right there on WFAN up in New York, the former Giant running back, of saying the NFL wants to see who has fire, who has passion, who has energy, who wants more than just the paycheck. And I really do. I find this to be fascinating. And look, we're all Georgia fans, so we kind of like good things about Georgia. I realize that. But this to me is just sort of a deeper level than that. This to me is just sort of an interesting observation that all of us who love both Georgia football but also college football in general, a lot of us are pretty nervous about all of the change. And we don't think this change is for the better. And, you know, sometimes we sort of think it's seemingly done on purpose, but that's a different day. A lot of this change makes us a little bit nervous. It is fascinating to me, though, that in an era of rapid, chaotic change, the things about Kirby Smart that sort of never seem to change are the things that still give him a competitive advantage. Isn't that fascinating? Does that fascinate you the way it does me? Because I think this is about more than just good, happy talk. You know, it's one thing to sort of say the right thing. I want guys who love football. But the honest truth is that it's a pretty difficult thing to measure. I play the game for the right reasons. I don't play the game just for the paycheck. Well, of course, everyone would say that. And in fact, every recruit does say that. Yeah, like you don't have to look very far to see evidence of every recruit knows the right words to say and knows how to say the thing that sounds the way that it's supposed to sound. But how does Georgia truly demonstrate that its team nucleus, the majority of its players, are what Smart is seeking after? Fire, passion, energy. Guys who are about more than just a paycheck. Not anti-paycheck. In fact, I like my paycheck. We're not anti-paycheck, but guys who want more than just, you know, money in the account, car in the garage, stuff like that. How do you measure that? Well, let me go to something else in the NFL draft from this past week. Did you see the really cool statement from Brad Holmes? You know, the Detroit Lions, and we've had fun with this, they got as into the Georgia stuff as the Philadelphia Eagles have got. And in fact, it's really interesting to see another NFL team not just drafting multiple Georgia players, but also celebrating the fact that they were doing so. And the Detroit GM, Brad Holmes, sounding a lot like what we've heard Howie Roseman, the reigning world champion Philadelphia Eagle GM, say many times before about why it is that the Georgia program is so attractive to the point they would want to draft multiple dogs in the same draft. If you want to know what loving football sounds like and playing for more than just a paycheck sounds like, what Holmes said recently is a perfect example of that.
Have been to Georgia practices a lot and has been around that program a lot, and it's unlike anything else that I've seen live in terms of a college practice, in terms of just the intensity. You know, Saban at Alabama was very similar, but just the intensity, the physicality, the detail, the tempo, the whole thing, the energy. I mean, it's so when you can go through that kind of regiment and when you practice like that, you know that they're ready. But I think, you know, everything that Coach Smart's done, you know, with that program, I think everything speaks for itself.
Now, none of this is easy, of course. But if it's fully executed the way that Brad Holmes describes his eyewitness account of being and the way that Smart says he's trying to hold his players account to, then it is a very, very, very powerful thing for the players involved in the program and the program overall. And furthermore, it's really difficult to copy. You know, if you're an innovative play caller, eventually people can just watch enough of your film that they can copy your playbook, essentially reverse engineer it, and now maybe they've got your secret sauce that way. Or if it's about going out and getting a certain size spec for players and being really committed to, you know, defensive lineman got to be this big, offensive lineman got to be this big, wide receivers got to run this fast. If all it is certain player specs, well, eventually that can be copied too, and many teams in the NFL do kind of copy each other on that. But if it's about holding players to account to love the game and play with the sort of fire, passion, and energy of those who do love the game, that's the sort of thing that can't really be easily copied because it's just not easy to do. It's easy to say the right thing, but have actions that fall short of your words. That's what's easy, and many people around football do. We've got enough evidence from Kirby Smart to know that they do more than just talk about this. They put it on display. They demonstrate it, so much so that whether it's Howie Roseman or Brad Holmes or whatever other personnel man around the NFL, they want as many Georgia players as they can get. So I've gone long. Let me just sort of wrap it up this way. If you're a Georgia fan, this nor anything else guarantees future success because college football is a very, very competitive business. But even if you can't guarantee the success, let me ask you, don't you like the way that Georgia goes about its competition? Don't you like the fact that Kirby Smart does stay, tightly committed to closely held principles and beliefs? And don't you like the way that's worked out for Georgia thus far? And even with a changing landscape of things around our sport, don't you believe in those beliefs that Smart has, their chance for success in the future? I know I do. And I love the fact that after another NFL draft, Georgia seems to be standing out from its competition for all the right reasons. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We are happy that you're with us, no matter how you get to us. Video, 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 96 The Ref, podcast, Apple, Spotify, everything else. By the way, smooth sailing with the podcast as of late. We had a couple of things that we were working on there, and it seems like that's kind of come together pretty well. We're also in the midst of kind of making a transition to our studio. One of these days, when you tune in to the show, it's going to look different. We are doing some transition there on that. I would say I spent some time in the new studio yesterday. That's pretty smooth as well. So very thankful behind the scenes, Cody and Jay and the entire group of folks kind of working to kind of make it go smooth. Kaylee oftentimes here with us while they're away. Danny, Kamal, everybody else. Just really, really appreciative to have Jack Leo's here sometimes. Just appreciative to have the folks who kind of help make it all go well. Very thankful for all of that. And speaking of going smoothly, that's what our friends at Breda Pest Management want to have be the case for you. This spring, this summer, you want to enjoy your home without having to worry about termite infestation and all that kind of stuff, or like critters getting in your attic or something like that. Our folks from Breda Pest Management are out there taking care of business for people in regards to those issues every single day. In business since 1975, 125 employees stretch all across the market area. That is a legacy of success that has been true in multiple generations of the Breda family. We love that. And we are very proud to know that Matt and his team, they've been working with us for a long time. They've also been recognized as the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. Boy, that's a great honor to have bestowed upon you. And when you work with Breda, you have the prestige of knowing that you're working with the same company that Georgia chooses to work with. But you also get the benefit, and listen, this never goes out of style. It matters for different reasons, seemingly every single day, every single year. How do you put more money back in your pocket? How do you make the cost of living for you and your family just a little easier to navigate? Well, anytime you have a chance to put more money back in your pocket, of course, you deserve to do that. You owe it to yourself to do that. So our friends at Breda Pest want to help you out with that. So find them online. It's BredaPest.com. B-R-E-D-A. I always like to spell it for you. B-R-E-D-A, BredaPest.com, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. All right, we're going to get to everything going on around Georgia post-NFL draft with Mike Griffith here coming up in a moment. But prior to that, let us get ready to go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Now, I'm going to play you another NFL draft-related clip. Many of you may have seen this one. This has been out there for a couple of days. I sort of think this is funny, and I got to explain to you why I think that it's funny. Malaki Starks was drafted by the Baltimore Ravens, and I think it was our guy Connor Riley who said this. I saw this online. Like, if there's ever like a Raven-style player, John Harbaugh we think is a good coach. Ravens we think are a very professional organization. Back into the first round, getting sort of a plug-and-play safety like Malaki Starks, it just sort of seems like a very Ravens-like thing to do. They are one of the model franchises, I believe, in the NFL. And, to get a very clean prospect like Malaki Starks, it just sort of feels Ravenish to me, I would say. And they were interviewing Starks about, coming there. And I don't know if this was the purpose of the interview or not, but they kind of got into, y'all remember Malachi's first game? It seems like it was 5 minutes ago. Doesn't it scare you how quickly life goes by? It seems like this was 5 minutes ago. Malachi's first game, stepping in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium against Oregon. He gets the big interception there. And Starks was sort of asked to break the play down. And when I say break the play down, like, he breaks it down to a granular level. He almost sounds like like a physicist, was an astrophysicist or like a rocket scientist or something like that. Like, I mean, his knowledge of football conversationally, just open conversation, talking about football. Like, it's so funny to me how cerebral he is about all this. I think it says something good about Starks. We just talked about Georgia players loving football. This would seem to be kind of a furthering of that, not just the physical part of it, but the cognitive, cerebral part of it too. Maybe this is not as funny to you as it is to me, but just the very specific detail that Malaki breaks down this interception against Oregon. I just find the overwhelming information provided here to be kind of funny. So this is just one clip, right, Cody? Just one clip. Here is Malaki Starks talking about his interception against Oregon, first college game with the Baltimore Ravens. You got to think Ravens fans love what they're getting in the person of Malaki.
Here,
okay, cool.
From your college career.
Let's do it.
And I want you to take a look at some of these and break down what you're seeing on these plays.
Okay.
You probably know this one right off the bat when you see what this play is.
So this was a big concept for them. This is trips. They have the tight end at 3. They only have so many concepts they run from the tight end at 3 with speed in the slot. My corner was actually supposed to give me an under call, so I was supposed to end up on 1. He would end up on 2. We're in cover 3, so I have hook droppers and I have my middle field safety, so just being able to use that and stay outside leverage. I make it seem like he's beating me. I get a good arm bar, so I'm able to turn around and find the ball. And once the ball's in the air, it's just about being comfortable, and I think I'm really good at being comfortable with the ball in the air. This is my first game. This is like my 4th play in the game. They're in trips. A lot of times when they get formation and boundary, they motion out to see what you're in, and most of the time try to get a matchup on a backer with a wide receiver or a slot running back to the field, being able to lose leverage, but they didn't, so they stayed in it. But with 2 being on the ball, I'm knowing that he's going vertical, but I'm also knowing that I'm losing Javon Bullitt, who's my help. He's not able to get a reroute, so I know I got to stay inside vertical. So when he gets to me, just being able to kind of do the same thing, just kind of arm bar. I'm in phase, so I'm able to look. And then whenever you look, you want to look and lean so you don't lose the receiver. And then at that point, it's just, making a play on the ball like we talked about earlier.
By the way, great job on the video part of that by Cody Chafin. Small thing. Y'all won't notice this, but kind of using our own stuff there to make sure we stay in good compliance. Very well done there on that. And excellent. I mean, just like Malaki Starks' knowledge of football about, what you do when you look for the ball so you don't lose the guy that you're covering, and just all of that. I mean, like, he knows so much about football, and he just sort of sits there and just describes it conversationally. Like, he comes across a little bit like Rain Man, but not in a bad way. Like, just sort of conversationally, listen, I've spent my entire life learning how to play the safety position, and so therefore I talk about that the way that, anybody else would talk about anything else they would have spent their entire life learning. It's just a really fun thing. I think it speaks to why Starks was such an attractive prospect, why Georgia fans loved him as much as they did. Terrific team leader, outstanding play. I think it's a really fun video. I'm guessing there was a little tongue-in-cheek with that from the Ravens when they put it up to begin with, just because of how intense the description was. And obviously I made reference to the Oregon interception. There was also the Clemson interception that also took place in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. You kind of got both of those there. Really good job by our Cody Chafin's putting that together. But just fun stuff from Malaki Starks. And, I'll say this in conclusion, that when you kind of turn the page on the NFL draft, there's always that, for a show like us, that anticipation of, okay, what's next? Okay, was Malaki this year? It's going to be KJ Bolden next year. And, Christian Miller, we talked to Connor about that yesterday, or CJ Allen, or some of these other guys are going to kind of step up and become the future first-rounders for the Georgia defense here this year. But I do think you're going to pause a little bit before you just completely move on to the next thing and talk about the ways in which the draft benefits Georgia. Sometimes it is appropriate to kind of just pause for a second and appreciate the player and his own personal story. And Malaki, who was already a football talent before he got to Georgia, a lot of them on the offensive side of the ball in high school, became a terrific player, a real student of the game while at Georgia. And we would assume just kind of plug and play for the Ravens for the next decade, barring injury. We would certainly assume that. And when you see the football knowledge put on display, you kind of understand what that's all about. An incredible young man, outstanding story, one of many for Georgia here this year. And that is Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And of course, As I mentioned, Malaki, one of those homegrown products from Jefferson High School, the Dragons. Terrific program, terrific career there. And, of course, nobody loves the homegrown stuff right here in our state more than our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau, whether it be the football players who grew up in our state or the farmers out there taking care of folks all across the country, all across the world. You know, the food that we produce ends up on the plates of Georgians, Americans, and citizens all throughout the world here. And the people at Georgia Farm Bureau are very proud of that. They have a long-time history of serving those in our agricultural community. But did you know this, and perhaps by now you do because we've certainly been talking about it, the same level of service that Georgia Farm Bureau has provided to Georgia's farmers, they can now provide to you whether you have a green thumb or not. They can meet your insurance needs. I'm talking about your home insurance, your auto insurance, the things you have to have that you probably want to work with friendly folks. Well, trust me, agents, claims adjusters, all the people there with Georgia Farm Bureau, these are friendly people who live in Georgia just like you do. That's why we say Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. So if you've got insurance or financial services needs, I want you to reach out to Georgia Farm Bureau to find out what they can do for you and how having a home team advocate on your side can be such a great thing. So give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. Or find them online, gfbinsurance.com. That is gfbinsurance.com. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. Now, speaking of the home team, plenty to talk about when it comes to these Georgia Bulldogs here right now, post-NFL draft. Let's do that and more with Mike Griffith here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Bringing in Mike Griffith. And, Mike, we played the Malaki Starks clip a moment ago, and I don't know if this is funnier to me than it is to other people because, look, we all know that Malachi's got a level of athleticism, and many Georgia players do, level of athleticism that can't really be matched by the average person. But, listen, if I spent my entire life studying the game of football, I have watched the game as a fan my entire life. I haven't studied it the way that Malaki has. Even if I had, I'm not sure I could speak about it as conversely as he does, conversationally as he does, just so casually, like just spitting out one piece of like deeply rooted knowledge over and over again. It's just funny to me how much Malaki Starks knows about football and how easily he just sort of spit it all out there with the Baltimore Ravens. Kind of a cool video they were willing to share.
Yeah, it was neat. It kind of gives you some insight into Kirby Smart and how he teaches in the secondary and the concepts, right? We always talk about how complex the Georgia defense is and all the different coverages and combinations and fronts and how it all works together. And as the safety, Malachi's, got to understand all those things that are happening in front of him and where everybody's at and where his help is at and what concept he plays against different formations, different routes. I mean, all this is rehearsed. And then, like you said, he has the athleticism to execute, but this isn't an accident. And I'd say that all of Kirby Smart's DBs probably have this level of knowledge, but what Malaki is able to do is just verbalize it, right, Brandon? I mean, there's, obviously that's what you do so well and why you're so effective as a host every day, and not just your knowledge, but your ability to explain things, the words you use, the way you're able to put it that entertains so many people and expresses so much knowledge. And I think that's what Malaki does. He's a great communicator. He is a film junkie. The thing we noted was how quickly he got on the field. You don't typically see true freshmen at safety. You maybe do that at corner, where the concepts maybe aren't quite as complex and you don't have to understand as many moving parts. But for a guy to come in as a true freshman and learn all those things, and KJ Bolden, I would say, was equally successful at transitioning from high school into college as well. So, you're kind of excited to see what KJ is going to bring. And certainly we're excited to see Malaki with the Ravens where, I like him with this franchise. It was interesting. He went from the pink suit at the draft, and I'm actually working on a story on Malaki right now that I'll post on DawgNation here sometime in the next couple of hours. But he went from that pink suit to a very business-like dark suit. Now he's a Raven. Now, this is an intimidating franchise. And, even though, as we know, Malaki to be this charismatic, charming young man, now he's going to be a part of a very fearsome defense that the Ravens are known for. So I'm excited for him. Obviously, he's excited to be a part of a franchise like that and, work for some really good coaches that are very similar in how they approach their defense to Georgia.
So something you touched on, I was also thinking about too, which is, even though I kind of make light of it, when you listen to Malaki speak so intricately about football, it is a reminder why it's hard to play as a freshman. And this to me is a challenging thing for college football right now, where the recruiting battles for the elite prospects are getting pretty pricey. So you spend big on a player to bring him in. And by the way, we're seeing less top-end player. There's a lot of transfers around college football. A lot of the top-end players are not doing that right now. They're just being held in the programs they're in. That's how teams are choosing to spend their money, by keeping guys there. So really, we're kind of seeing kind of a return to form where, in some respects, your best chance to get a great talent is out of high school. You have to spend big to get him. But when you listen to Malaki speak so expertly about football, you're reminded, I don't care what kind of athlete you are, it's still hard to play as a freshman. And Georgia confronts this. All of the top programs, to a degree, confront this, where I don't care how talented you are, the ability to play well early as a freshman, the way that Malaki Starks did, that's still going to kind of be a little bit of a rarity for most prospects across the board.
Yeah, especially quarterback, and I know we've talked about it amongst ourselves. I know we talked about it on the DawgNation cruise, but you go out and sign a freshman quarterback that you're paying $3 million a year or $2 million a year, and the guy's not going to play for 3 years, versus getting a guy that's ready to go out of the portal and compete for a championship his first year on campus. So the model, this whole NIL model, which hopefully this House versus NCAA settlement will, finish up at some point when I guess the judge needs another week or whatever after watching this thing unfold for 5 years, go figure. But once we get this, salary cap in range, how do you spend the money? And how much money do you spend, like you said, on those talented freshmen? Now, it appears to me that a guy like Elijah Griffin is going to be on the verge of, making a contribution right away. It looks like money well spent. Or Malaki Starks had this model been in place, or KJ Bolden for that matter. But what about when you get the guy that's got to marinate for a couple years and you're paying out that big money, right? So I think your point is spot on when you talk about the amount of knowledge that you need to play in the Georgia system in a pro-style offense. Now, Ohio State does things a little simpler. You're able to see some other quarterbacks maybe transition into that system. Will Howard, Justin Fields were able to go in there and play right away. Maybe not the same level of complexity as the Georgia offense. And I'd say the same is true of the Georgia defense and the amount of different things that Georgia can do defensively with their concepts, with their depth, and the way they move their personnel around.
So before you joined us, I made kind of an interesting contrast between something that Kirby Smart said during spring practice and something that the New York Giants running back Tiki Barber recently said about kind of the attitude around the NFL. Smart actually took a little criticism for this back in the spring when he was like, I want to see guys who are about more than just the paycheck. At no point in time has Kirby ever, to my knowledge, criticized the idea that players get paid. I don't think he has a problem with that at all. But players who sort of only care about the paycheck and don't love the game, Smart has made very clear that is not the kind of player that's going to thrive at Georgia, nor will that player, if they learn that, be really invited to be a part of the Georgia program. And I think to a lot of people, certainly, some people, when Kirby said that back during spring practice, it sort of seemed like, Kirby's set in his ways, not evolving with the times here and what football is becoming. But now after the NFL draft, you've got guys like Tiki Barber or Jay Glazer or other kind of, sort of prominent voice in that sport kind of echoing the same thing, that now the NFL draft is not just looking at your injury history or do you have some sort of off-field, red flag. As Tiki said, the league is now looking, do you like football? Do you want to play for more than just a paycheck? Do you like more than just the car that's in the garage? Do you want to get out there and grind on a regular basis? And all of a sudden now, if we take these words seriously, what the NFL says they care about, Kirby Smart's been saying he cares about that for quite some time. I think the symmetry with that's actually pretty interesting. And I would say if you're a Georgia fan, Mike, it's also pretty comforting too.
Yeah, I like you said, everybody wants to get paid and Kirby knows that. But I think he's talking like the priority. The priority needs to be the love of the game. You bring up, contrast Andrew Thomas and Isaiah Wilson. Here's two former first-round Georgia football players, and one guy's still playing, and the other guy never really panned out. Got the big rookie contract, and Brandon, I don't know where Isaiah Wilson is right now, but he sure did look good coming out of Georgia. But did he love the game? And that was the question. And you see that, and you hear that in the interviews. Listen to Mykel Williams' interview with 49ers, and we got a story up on DawgNation.com right now. Mykel Williams played at 70% last year. And his attitude was, if the coaches said I could play, I'm going to play. I want to be out there. He loves the game. And you go, well, maybe he's a fast healer. No, maybe he just loves the game. Tate Ratledge, same thing. Got back real fast from that tightrope surgery. Some guys take a little bit longer. And maybe it's their body, but also maybe it's their intent. So I do think the love of the game is important. It's what's going to keep you in the film room. It's why a guy like Malaki Starks knows so much about defense, because he loves the game. Other guys maybe don't take to that quite as quickly. They have to become more coachable. They have to find their passion for the game. And we've seen that happen at Georgia. And some guys mature faster than others, simply because of how much extra work they're willing to put in. And I think that's why we're all pulling for Gunnar Stockton, because we know Gunnar loves the game. I mean, you had Jake Fromm on your show a couple years ago when he was breaking down all the quarterbacks, Brock Vandegrift and Carson Beck and Gunnar Stockton. And he said Gunnar was the guy that spent, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I was left with the impression that Gunnar was the guy that put the most time in the film room. And you want to see the guy that loves the game have the ability to execute those things. So at Georgia, it's a perfect storm of talent and development. The cohesiveness on the staff is important. You mentioned the new players coming in and having to coach up the bottom of the roster. That's where having a cohesive staff really matters. So the left hand knows what the right hand's doing. Everybody's coaching the same thing. Everybody knows the terminology like the back of their hands. I think that's a big advantage for Georgia.
And I'll also say, too, and I know you're not as big a golf fan as I am, but there is some precedent for this in sports, too. Historically, like one of the top events in golf is the Ryder Cup. And historically, players have not gotten paid for participating in that. Now, these are very rich players. They make all kinds of money on course and off. But if you talk to whether it's the European guys, the American guys, most of them will tell you, biggest honor of their career, selected for a Ryder Cup team. Best memories they've had in their career, moments that might have occurred for them in the Ryder Cup. That it's not just college football players who are asked to care about more than money. We see this across sports sometimes where, hey, go get your money and, go get paid, but show me the ability to compete for something other than money. There is precedent for this, by the way, in other sports. I would say the Ryder Cup is perhaps maybe the best example of that.
Yeah, we could go back in the day to the IROC series in NASCAR. We could talk about NBA players playing in the Olympics. To your point, Davis Cup in tennis when you play for your country. Now, these guys are, naive. I mean, if you perform well in these events, it could lead to some endorsement deals. But in terms of just pure purse, it certainly doesn't compare. But I'm with you. You want to see people that play for the love of the competition. I mean, that's, I miss the old, I'll say this, let me get on a quick soapbox. I miss the All-Star games that meant something. I really remember watching, NFL All-Star games and NBA All-Star games when it looked like these guys really cared. Now it's turned into, some silly exhibitions and you're like, why are we even doing this anymore? Or Brandon, remember the superstar competitions when you see the different athletes from different sports out there swimming against each other or running the 60-yard dash or doing the tug of war? There was something about that element of competition or the best players in the league doing the NBA slam dunk competition, right? Now it's like, yeah, no, he's too good for that. We got to get some of these younger guys. So I'm with you. I think we all love that raw element of competition, and it dials back to the guys that are the most successful in their sport that play and have the long. Tom Brady. When he was an NFL player, wasn't my favorite guy, because he wasn't on the team I liked, or he was beating the teams I liked, or whatever. But now that Tom Brady's retired and you're unpacking and finding out who this guy is and what was behind all his success, you're like, wow, how could I not like this guy? The level of preparation, the mental attitude, the willingness and the love to play football all these years when he could have retired years and years ago and lived happily and successfully. So we tip the cap to that. And I think that's why we all have that love and appreciation for Malaki Starks, because he came in with a big smile, left with a big smile. And now the Ravens are just, doing, backflips and somersaults to have a guy like Malaki on their franchise.
So 3 first-round picks for Georgia this year. We'll finish with this. Kirby Smart obviously has been pointed out more more first-round picks than losses in his Georgia career here thus far. But if you look at the 2026 NFL draft, early mock drafts don't quite have 3 for Georgia right now. Yeah. You see, a little bit of this guy, a little bit of that guy. If I were to sort of pose it to you, who do you think Georgia's most likely first-round draft picks in 2026 might be? We'll finish with that for today.
Yeah, probably, I think Christian Miller. He's already popping up on a lot of tape. I think people really like him. Carson Beck's transferred. I guess technically he's not a Georgia Bulldog anymore, but he played at Georgia. He's a first-round talent that if he was at Georgia, he'd probably be a projected top 5. But
not the way he played last year, he probably would.
Well, I don't know. There was a couple of games that looked pretty good. But if they catch the ball, those numbers would look different. But, You wonder a little bit what's going to happen in Miami. I digress. Looking at the offensive line wouldn't seem to offer any first round picks to me. Running back, I don't think so. Wide receiver, potentially maybe Noah Thomas. I think Branch is on one of the mock drafts that I've seen out there. I wonder a little bit about the linebackers. I really like C.J. Allen. Yeah. I don't know how much more him and Raylan Wilson can elevate. K.J. Bolden's not draft eligible. Right. I think he's a first round talent. Right. How about Dalen Everett though, Brandon? I mean, that's a guy that considered going out and in the mold of a Kamari Lassiter. So I think there's a few guys, and then there's just always people that emerge. I mean, they all, we didn't have Jalen Walker. I didn't think he was a first round pick going in this year, but boom, here he is, going to the Falcons.
It is the story for Georgia that the best individual seasons are oftentimes not really projected. We've highlighted before that when the Georgia defense broke out in such a big way in 2021, Trayvon Walker was not first team all SEC. Devontae Wyatt wasn't mentioned at all. Jordan Davis was.
Quay Walker.
I mean, even if you want to go way back in the past when Roquan broke out in 2017, there weren't a lot of projections for Roquan to win the Buckus Award that year either. So you definitely have a lot of guys who have broken out at Georgia in a way that the preseason prognostications didn't necessarily suggest. So I'll finish with this. I think you mentioned some interesting names. If it were to become true that Dalen Everett, Christian Miller, and I think these are realistic possibilities, although not guaranteed. If Everett is a cornerback, Miller is a defensive lineman, and heaven forbid if either Branch or Thomas is a wide receiver. If you found first-round performances from those three guys right there, either Branch or Thomas, a cornerback and a defensive lineman, true premium positions, my gosh, Mike, the fortunes for Georgia, I think, would be raised. Already pretty high expectations, but the fortunes for Georgia would be raised so dramatically if you got those sorts of performances at true high-value premium positions like cornerback, defensive line, and obviously wide receiver.
Yeah, and throw this qualifier out there because, as we step back and, part from last season, we go, oh my gosh, they had 13 picks and, they won the SEC, but they lost in the playoff. The thing I think that's very important to remember is how the injuries affected. And yeah, you had a first round of Michael Williams, but for how many games did you? Right. Yeah, you had a second rounder, Tate Ratledge, but for how many games did you have? When you have these injuries, it affects you. And you go back to 21 and 22, and I'm not saying those teams were injury free, but we didn't see the same amount of injuries that we saw last year. And to me, that's what made Georgia's season last year so impressive. And, not just the schedule that they had to overcome, but the injuries that they had to overcome. The drop pass is such an uncharacteristic thing at Georgia. There were so many hurdles in the way. And it's like, we talk about that, how things have to go right. You have to catch the right breaks. And I think this next Georgia team has what it takes if they can catch the right breaks and get the quarterback play. To me, that this team can win a championship. It can. Yeah. But if you have that spate of injuries, the schedule is just tough enough. If there's more drop passes or, an injury at quarterback or maybe the quarterback plays subpar, maybe you'll have to settle for another SEC title and 10-win season and playoff appearance.
Mike,
settle for that.
Mike, fun conversation. We'll certainly have plenty more of that in the months to come. Thanks for being here today. Look forward to, you mentioned a story coming up about Malaki Starks. We'll look forward to reading that at DawgNation.com. Talking to you very soon here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
All right. Thanks, Brandon. Have a good one.
You too.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Good stuff there from Mike Griffith. By the way, coming up in a couple of minutes, those of you watching on video, and if you're listening, I'll describe it to you. Interesting video from Kirby Smart. This is the time of year in which Smart, as much as he ever does, gets a chance to sort of relax a little bit, let the hair down, so to speak. A little golf activity yesterday with some other top coaches. We'll give you some video of that here coming up in just a moment. I think you might like that. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Of course, Mike Griffith, a big part of our Dawg Nation cruise. And honestly, I've been in a good mood all week, just kind of looking back on the fun that people had on board Utopia of the Seas for our Dawg Nation cruise. And you see some of the video there, people just sort of hanging out and having a good time. Our Kaylee Manziel, me kind of there, a part of all that too there in the background. Jeff Sintel. It's just such a fun experience. And we're there for one of our public events. It's called Music Hall. That's the kind of nightclub type place we're sort of set up at. And, late night there at Music Hall, you've got the band playing, the rock band, everybody's kind of dancing. And I was saying this to a few of our people. Like, there was a couple of moments there on the ship where I just looked around, saw everybody having a good time, the beverages were flowing. Everybody's kind of enjoying themselves, just sort of having a good time. And I don't know, just one of those things. It just sort of felt really good to see, right? When you create something like this, the purpose of doing it is so our people can enjoy themselves and our people can have a good time doing it. And I don't know, it just sort of seemed to really come together in a great way. So I was thrilled about that. I can't wait for our DawgNation cruise in 2026. I'm looking forward to that. We already have our dates for it, April 20th to the 24th. And the same person that's helped us for years, she's going to help us one more time here in 2026 as well. So Jessica Slater, I want you to give her a call, 770-718-9147. 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Now, this is a year away, but keep in mind, Utopia of the Seas right now is the hottest commodity in the cruise world. Everybody's booking travel well ahead of time. We have to work and finagle just to get our block of rooms secure for this. So it is limited space and limited inventory. That's not just me being a blowhard. It is true. It is limited inventory in order to be a part of this DawgNation cruise. So you want to act as fast as you can to get involved, be a part of this. One more time, give Jessica a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Email her, of course, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Now, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Of course, SEC analyst Greg McElroy, he's got his own show. He has recently come out with his top 10 quarterbacks to begin the season. And interesting for kind of who makes it, sort of who's not on the list. Let me kind of rattle through this, and I want to talk to you about this a little bit. He's got Cade Klubnik from Clemson, number 1. After that, John Mateer from Oklahoma, Sam Levitt from Arizona State, who they did hold on to, by the way, Drew Allar from Penn State, Garrett Nussmeier, LSU, Carson Beck, Miami, Lenora Sellers, South Carolina, Sawyer Robertson, Baylor, DJ Lagway, Florida, and then Haynes King from Georgia Tech. So a few things to mention about this. First of all, a list like this, prominent for who's not included, guys we haven't seen a lot of yet. No Arch Manning, no Gunnar Stockton, guys that might have a chance to play their way onto this by the end of the year are not there now. And I don't have a problem with saying my top 10 list for the moment is reflective of kind of what we do know about the sport. We would assume that some of those guys will play their way onto this list by the time the year is done, and therefore some of the guys who are on the list might play their way off. Let me give you a couple of thoughts about that just for a moment. First of all, he's got John Mateer from Oklahoma, number 2. I really don't know a ton about Mateer. Probably could not pick him out of the lineup, but I am skeptical of his presence at Oklahoma for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, doesn't this feel a little bit like kind of copycatting history? You know, people say history repeats itself, but does it really repeat itself this much where, Cam Ward goes from Incarnate Word. He actually, I think, brings his OC from Incarnate Word with him to Washington State. Then Ward transfers from Wazoo to Miami, becomes his household name. And now people sort of think, well, Mateer is going to be the next sort of Washington State quarterback to sort of transfer to the big time and become a household name because of that. It very well might happen, and based on NIL dollars, we believe that Mateer is one of the biggest free agent acquisitions in the entire sport here this year. But keep in mind where he's going. He is going to a very desperate Oklahoma team, an Oklahoma team where Brent Venables is sort of hanging on by a string right now, brings the OC with him. This sort of feels like a little too cute to me. Team desperate for quarterback, brings in the quarterback from the school that also most recently produced the other big-time transfer quarterback. It would not surprise me if the Mateer situation sort of falls flat. Now, if it doesn't, then you've got to say, bringing in Jim Nagy as the general manager and Venables as an on-field coach, that Oklahoma has ended up having the biggest offseason of anybody because they also brought in the running back from Cal, too. So this is either a situation where Oklahoma, with Venables in his back against the wall, they've had just the biggest offseason of anybody, or a program was so desperate to sort of maintain something in year 2 of the SEC, they perhaps overspent for guys who are not quite worth it. If I had to guess, I think it's the latter that's maybe more likely true when it comes to Oklahoma. I'll also mention Drew Allar from Penn State here for a moment. Once again, people kind of fall in love with the idea of history repeating itself. And a year ago, the sort of put up or shut up team in the Big Ten, if not now win, was Ohio State. And Ohio State spent big we're obviously led to believe, along the way to a national championship. And one of the offseason stories thus far has been, well, now it's Penn State's turn to do the same thing. And they kept their running backs in place, keep Alar. They've kept a lot of the guys on their roster from transferring. They also recently went out and got remember the wide receiver from Syracuse who Fran Brown said he wasn't going to give $2 million to? Well, I don't know how much they gave him, but Penn State got him. So the big dollar wide receiver, they add him. This is certainly an example of what we see a lot of in the Big Ten right now, that programs that have underachieved in this new financial landscape, they're just sort of throwing money at the problem. And it worked for Ohio State. It's probably worked to a degree for Michigan. And now Penn State, one of the more underachieving programs in the entire country, is seemingly trying to throw money at the problem this year. We'll find out if it does work for them. If it does, Alar probably has that kind of season. I don't see how you can rank Carson Beck ahead of Lenora Sellers. I just don't. Lenora Sellers, with less talent around him, had a better season a year ago than Carson Beck did. And listen, I don't want to relitigate the whole Beck era. Beck did some good things while at Georgia. But the numbers were never really like eye-popping. I mean, let's just also be candid about that. And maybe he goes to Miami. Maybe he becomes the next Cam Ward. Perhaps he will. But I don't know that I ever saw greatness when I saw Carson Beck. I saw the potential for maybe greatness. I saw promise. I saw a guy at times I was glad to have as the Georgia quarterback. But did you see greatness? Now, greatness was sometimes projected, and, frankly, we probably, projected the potential for that too. But in terms of the actual achievement, is that what Carson ever really did? I don't know. Top 10 quarterback, maybe. Better than a guy like Sellers, who was playing like the best in the SEC. Can't do that. DJ Lagway's on here. No problem with that. How about Haynes King, though, from Georgia Tech? This, once again, coming from our guy, Greg McElroy, his top 10 quarterbacks. The one fan base that has no room to argue on that should have nothing bad to say about that, is obviously Georgia. Because Haynes King has played like, I don't know, a cross between Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson every time he's played against Georgia. So if anybody would say that Haynes King is a top 10 quarterback, it is probably Georgia and its fans. And it also reinforces something we've said before, which is when you look at the big non-conference game for Georgia this year, you don't really see the Clemson to begin the season, the Oregon to begin the season. You don't really see that. This year, I would say, Tech's got an over-under of about 7.5. They got a guy like Haynes King getting top 10 quarterback buzz. They kept King when presumably a lot of teams may have come calling on him. They held on to Buster Faulkner. Georgia Tech is a big non-conference game for Georgia this year. It is the big non-conference game for Georgia this year. And frankly, the atmosphere in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, because that's where the game is this year, the atmosphere in MBS, when that game is played at the end of the season, it may be a Clemson-Oregon-style atmosphere. It may be a pretty big atmosphere. The clean, old-fashioned hate, because of the fact that Tech has been close and has been celebrated as the moral victor for playing close against Georgia, that game may have some juice to it this year. And maybe Georgia needs that on its way to a postseason run. So there's that. Also, let me mention this. Branson Robinson, speaking of in-state lesser programs, is leaving Georgia, and he's on his way to Georgia State. Now, I think in a lot of ways this makes a lot of sense for Branson. Del McGee's obviously a coach that knows him very well. I think that Branson Robinson wants to show the college football world he's in good health. And honestly, I don't know a single Georgia fan that won't be rooting hard for Branson. I really, really don't. And that's true whether he played at Georgia State or whether he played anywhere. Georgia fans have kind of, and in professional sports, fans have been doing this for a long time. There's certain guys that when they leave you, you may root against him if he's playing your team, but you sort of root for him against everybody else. Georgia fans do a lot of that with their former guys. I don't think anybody puts any blame on Branson for the injuries that he dealt with. And I don't think anybody faults Branson for sort of thinking, hey, I got to find a place where I can get featured and I can kind of show that I am healthy again. And after that, who knows? Maybe he goes on to the NFL. Maybe he gets a chance to go play big-time Power 4 football somewhere else. I'm not saying I want him to leave Georgia State, but maybe he will. The future can still be really bright for Branson, and being back with a coach that knows him like Del McGee, maybe that's the appropriate next step for him. So we wish him well on his way to Georgia State. And let me finish with this. So yesterday was also, y'all know the Peach Bowl does their kind of coaches challenge golf tournament every year. Southern Company sponsors it now. Chick-fil-A had sponsored it for a long time. You see Kirby Smart showing up. You see all the various coaches there. Mike Norvell and Urban Meyer won the thing. Second year in a row they've won this. Kirby Smart, who's actually paired up with Gus Malzahn, which, I don't know, that's a little bit like Dusty Rhodes, Nikita Koloff, or like Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage. Pretty odd pairing to become a tag team partner with. But nonetheless, I guess Malzahn and Kirby don't mind playing golf against each other. Pretty good drive there from Kirby Smart. You got Brent Key going shirt untucked. I don't know. I don't know about that. It's such a nice course. Would it kill Brent Key to tuck in his shirt to play golf at an elite country club? Seems like that's not asking too much. But nonetheless, watching this event go down, by the way, Dan Lanning from Oregon was there, coming back there for this. I've always sort of felt like, I think you've maybe heard me say this before. My theory about Kirby Smart in golf is that Kirby Smart is the exact right amount of good at golf. I mentioned this before. Mike Norvell and Urban Meyer won the thing. Norvell's now won this several times, I think. He's won it 2 years in a row with Urban Meyer. But I want to say that Norvell, I think I have this right, has won the thing multiple times. By the way, Kirby's Georgia golf visor is sharp. That is a pristine logo. The point is, Norvell has won this a bunch. If I'm a Florida State fan, I'm furious about that. Like, to me, you don't want your coach to be a great golfer. Because if you're a great golfer, you spent way too much time on the driving range and not nearly enough time on the recruiting trail. Like, you want your coach to be a good golfer. It means that he's got some friends that he can play with. He sort of handles pressure situations. But I don't want a guy shooting 65. Like, you know, the other, like Paul Johnson also plays in this event. Johnson may be among the best golfers of coaches and former coaches. Johnson gets aces. Like, he's a very good golfer. And when you watch the sort of lack of commitment, like the recruiting trail back when he was coaching at Tech, sort of checks out. Oh, that's what he was doing instead of going out there and populating his roster with big-time players. Kirby, middle of the pack. He and Malzahn finished 6th yesterday out of 12 teams. That's about what I want. I mean, you can watch his swing. It's a competent swing. He kind of knows how to, like, you'll see him at this senior pro-am coming up. There's Norvell again. Yeah, like Norvell, too good at golf. Too good at golf. If I'm a Florida State fan, furious about that. Way too good. Not nearly enough talent on the Florida State roster. I don't want my coach to be that good at golf. Kirby Smart seems to be about right. He holds his own, decent-looking swing, knows how to kind of bust chops out there with the other guys, sort of fits in okay. But if you're dominating the sort of celebrity golf tour, then you're not winning enough. And Mike Norvell is the perfect example of that. We'll make that. Cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. So fun stuff there. Appreciate our folks from the Peach Bowl sharing that video with us there, too. How about a golden shoe for today? We have talked a lot about the fact that we don't think people seem to have the appropriate appreciation for and proper memory of the fact that Georgia did beat Texas twice this past season. We've said before that we're going to try to do our part to help people remember this, that somehow, Texas is the new hotness around college football, but they are toting 2 L's from Georgia this past year, and we want people to remember that. Well, our buddy Lash LaRue writes in to help us do that. He gives the hashtag Longhorn Losers, a really fun drawing here of the Georgia Bulldog, and you see a rendition of Bevo there. The big horns, hanging 2 L's from those horns. Lash, I love this. I think that's well done. You are clearly a great artist and also a smart man, too. So we'll give you a golden shoe for that, for helping us remember our recent history here with 2 wins over Texas. How about the lousy stinking Gators? A lot more than 2 wins against them. That is another that keeps on going. And by the way, listen, DJ Lagway, top 10 quarterback, I got no beef with that. But it's going to take more than just a quarterback for Florida to be competitive with Georgia here again. In fact, it's been 1,635 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. You love that. It's our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. Back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price promised. You can trust them on all of that. By the way, SEM Dog at DawgNation.com. Braves took the series from the Rockies last night. He says the Rockies might qualify as a mid-major this year. Some of the gambling guys were on this before the season began, that the Rockies might low-key be as bad as the White Sox were a year ago. But to watch them in person, not in person, but to watch them live, I should say, on TV, they are so bad. They are so bad. The guy they started last night, Ben Ingram, had this stat on the radio broadcast. He was yielding base runners to like 40-something% of the batters he'd faced thus far in the season. Like, that's not great for like the 13U circuit. Like, that's not great in 13U baseball. You can't be a major league pitcher and have a guy getting on base be something close to a 50-50 proposition. You can't do that. That is not good. That is not good. But nonetheless, that's the way that it goes down. Yeah, Rockies are bad right now. Garrison Tucker says AI made that cartoon. I know AI made it. I know AI made it. A lot of y'all have gotten a lot more AI-centric with your Golden Shoe submissions. But that one actually looks a little bit less AI than some of them do. But I like the idea somebody drew it. I like the idea of that. Oh, Senior Dog says Emerson Hancock's pitching for the Angels today. So he was with Seattle. Now he's with the LAA Angels of Anaheim. That's cool. Good for him. I always liked Hancock. Oh, and let me tell you something. The great what if of all time, maybe not of all time, a great recent what if. How about if we dial down the hyperbole a little bit? You know, obviously 2020, most frustrating year of my life, really worst year of my life. Thankfully, I haven't had too many bad years. 2020 was terrible. Frankly, still, let me not say much more. But one of the great what ifs of recent history was with Hancock and Cole. What was his name? The other guy ended up going to San Diego. Those two pitchers, what Georgia could have been in a postseason in 2020. Cody, why am I blanking on the other guy other than Hancock? He's a really good frontline pitcher too. Yeah, it was Was it Cole? It's Cole. It's Emerson Hancock and Cole Wilcox. That were their names, right? Two terrific frontline pitchers. What could have happened for them in 2020? One of the great what ifs. That team could have won the World Series. DT says Dawgs baseball last night was boring. He says he had 5 hits by pitch by both teams. Dawgs struck out 15. Was so slow. Yeah, I mean, I love college baseball. The midweek games are not often things of beauty. Just to be honest, the midweek games are not often things of beauty. Georgia is also, as sometimes is the want for college baseball, they have been in a couple of HBP Fest this year. I've only been able to go to one game this year. The game we went to was an SEC game. There were like 8 guys hit by pitch in that game too. Sometimes it happens. And honestly, you're teaching these guys how to pitch. I have a relatively high tolerance for that because you've got to be able to pitch inside if you want to go to the next level. You can't pitch, middle out and live, a professional life. You've got to learn how to pitch inside. And if you do pitch inside, you're going to get some run, and you're going to hit guys every now and then. And for the most part, college guys are really good about dusting themselves off and going to first base. That nobody's trying to hit anybody. I mean, sometimes it probably happens, but for the most part, guys are trying to utilize the inner part of the play. And you're going to have some guys get hit, especially midweek, because those are oftentimes your younger pitchers. Drives coaches, of course, crazy because it's a free base. But I have an okay tolerance for that. However, I do understand where you're coming from, DT. As someone who is an evangelist for college baseball, there are certain games that I would not show on the highlight reel of here's why you should watch college baseball, and oftentimes the games that show up are the midweek type. That is true.
All right, so if we hit Shador today, we will news broke during the show. Falcons fined $250,000 for the Jeff Ulbrich thing. Ulbrich fined $100,000.
A personal $100,000.
Yeah. So I don't know. That kid's gonna be mowing some lawns this summer.
So that's very interesting. I guess I'm glad it's not a draft pick for Atlanta. I can say with full confidence that of all the sports controversies in recent years, this is the single dumbest one I have ever seen. I have never seen a dumber sports controversy than this, ever. It was not a good thing to do. It was a distasteful thing to do. My understanding is Shedeur was one of many draft picks. I mean, I heard that there was one guy that got 5 prank calls. The idea that Shedeur, has been violated because of this prank call is the single dumbest thing I have ever heard. And you got these, shout fest on ESPN, the daytime TV people. They want to take a first-round pick away from the Falcons, or they want to put, what's his name, Jax Ulbrich. They want to put him in jail or whatever else. I realize that, look, a lot of what we talk about is stupid. I do realize that. And by we, I mean just the sort of sports talk community. I realize that's a lot of the stuff that ends up making its way to, First Take or whatever they do on FS1. I realize a lot of this is dumb. It's never been dumber than this. It has never been dumber than this. Now, a year from now, will something else happen that's probably dumber? I weep for our future, but probably so. But to this point, this is the dumbest thing that has ever captured the attention of the American sports fan. I am sorry that Shedeur Sanders got a prank call. I am sorry. My advice would be to get over it. That would be my advice. This is the dumbest thing I have ever seen in my entire life. America is a lesser country today than it was 3 days ago because of the hysteria that has gone on around prank call game. Now, Ulbrich probably shouldn't have done it. My guess is, being the son of an NFL defensive coordinator, if I had to guess without knowing Jax Ulbrich very well, my guess is he probably looks at the NFL as a future employer. He can probably forget about that now. He has to live with his own consequences here too. I don't have a lot of, I don't care about him either. He's probably cost himself a chance to work in the same field that his father worked in. He'll have to live with that consequence. But this idea that we're supposed to be devastated on behalf of, an NFL draft pick because somebody prank called him. This happens in college football, and I promise I'm going to shut up. I promise I'm going to shut up about this because people don't really want to talk about it. This happens in college football all the time, and it has happened forever, even pre-cell phone. People would find out what hotel the team was staying at. They'd honk the horns at night. They'd call remember when people used to call hotel rooms? They'd call the hotel room. Tim Tebow had him blowing up his little flip phone, cell phone. I guess Stetson Bennett had a flip phone too. But Stetson Bennett had this before the Tennessee game in 2022. And you know what happens in college football? The people on the receiving end of it, somehow, some way, believe it or not, they just sort of shake it off and move on with their life. They just sort of get over it. There is way too much like reality TV, social media influencer drama in sports. I don't think we've quite realized how much sports has been taken over by the sort of overly dramatized stuff. It's really, really bad. And with that, I want to stop talking. Let's see what else. Jimbo Sliced Bread mentioning that. My understanding is, I don't know, but my understanding is, according to what I've read, there are a ton of people that have gotten prank calls to the point where some people are getting multiple prank calls. First of all, I don't ever answer my phone. You could call me, work colleague could call me. I don't ever answer my phone. I stopped answering my phone years ago. Now, I guess if you think you're about to get drafted, that's a different thing. But I haven't answered my phone in years because it's all fake. It's all in fact, if I ever do accidentally answer my phone because I think it's something else, it's whoever's on the other end it's an obvious scam. Now, sometimes I can't quite tell what the scam is, but it's obvious that it's a scam. So, the idea that NFL draft picks are getting scammed, we're all getting scammed. Every time the phone rings, it's something, I got to stop. All right, Jonathan Aaron says, if your son was going to get drafted, would you rather have him at the draft or at the house for a party with friends and family? I guess I would rather have him at home because, look, ultimately it's just great to be drafted, but you don't love being the last one in the green room. That always ends up being the kind of thing they go back to and show over and over again. You probably don't love that. So I believe I'd like the home party. But you've also got to have, You got to have some parameters around that because I don't know, man. There's a lot of people that show up at some of these parties, and you're kind of wondering, like how well do you know this guy really? Like how close are you to him really? Because if y'all ever have kids that go on to be first-round draft pick type people, as you know, you're going to find out you got family you didn't know you had, and that is how life works. Let's see what else. Let's see what else is going on here. On a serious note, we mentioned this yesterday. Tim Grubb mentioned it too. I know Jeff Dancer did, go back to work last night and did the Georgia baseball game against Kansas State. And, sometimes that's just what makes sense to you. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, sometimes just doing the job that you love, being around the people that you love, sometimes that's just how you make sense of the world around you. I know it must have been incredibly hard to do. Many of you know we wrote the story about it at DawgNation.com. I mentioned on yesterday's show, Jeff lost his wife after a really courageous battle with cancer over the course of the last couple of years. It's like one of the worst. I mean, it's just one of the worst stories you'll ever hear. Just, seemed to be a very happy couple. I know Jeff. I guess I'm embarrassed to say this. I only recently learned that their family was going through this. I see Jeff at football games, things like that. We typically just sort of talk about football or talk about baseball. We'll talk about high school football a lot too. Jeff and I like to talk about that. So I see him at games. I'm very friendly with Jeff. I like Jeff a lot. Did not know that he was going through this until really very recently. So I probably haven't done a good enough job of keeping up with people if I'm not aware of stuff like that. Just an incredibly sad story. I mean, it really is. I don't have a lot of words to I can't do much to make this anything other than it is. Just an incredibly, incredibly sad story. But I know our community is really good at coming around people in a situation like this. So Jeff's going to need us, and hopefully you'll be there for him. I'm sure you will be. I'm sure you will be. Getting back to football, Gary Roach says, I think it's receivers that make a quarterback great. Had our receivers caught the ball, we would be calling Carson great. I think it's kind of true. I think that both things can be true. I do think in college football, oftentimes, I think the receivers make the quarterback better. I always said I thought that was true for Tua Tagovailoa at Alabama. That's not a shot at Tua. But I mean, when you got Henry Ruggs and Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith and Jerry Jeudy, to me, when Alabama really broke, I mean, people talk about the breakthrough Alabama offensively. And Tua sometimes gets some of that credit. Lane Kiffin gets a lot of that credit. I'm not trying to trash any of these guys. To me, the biggest thing that ever happened for Alabama, on the heels, I'm guessing, of what, like Amari Cooper, they were able to sell Ruggs, Devontae, and Jeudy all came the same year. They brought those three receivers in the same year, and they brought Jalen Waddle in the following year. Like, that was a transformational thing for Alabama. To get that kind of receiving talent in the program was a massive, massive deal. And I do believe that Alabama became much better offensively because of that. That oftentimes receivers do make the quarterback better. In the NFL, though, I mean, the Chiefs, for instance, don't spend a dime on receivers. I mean, they get receivers off the scrap heap because they think we got the Hall of Fame quarterback. He's going to make them good, whoever they might be. And that kind of works too. Georgia this past year said, if our quarterback is going to command millions of dollars in NIL, then we don't think it's unreasonable to ask him to make the receivers better. Develop some stars in the pass catching ranks as kind of a future first-round pick style quarterback. And no doubt Georgia was plagued by drops, but, listen, we could really litigate the past in this over and over again. There's plenty of blame to go around. You could sort of dice it all up. And no doubt Beck's numbers would have been better had there not been drops. Carson Beck was an imperfect quarterback, though. He was an imperfect quarterback. He was. And look, you can if we went back and kind of spliced all this together, it's kind of an interesting timeline for us when it comes to Beck. I'm like a lot of y'all. After 2021, I didn't really know what Georgia had in Beck. And if I had to bet at that point in time, my bet was this will be a guy that never really sees the field. Some guys just don't. And I probably didn't think much of Carson Beck at that time. Spring of 2023, Carson Beck really won me over. And we did some very honest shows about this. We really did. Yeah, I try my best to be as candid as I can be. We don't ever want to unfairly malign a player. We want to try to be as honest as we can possibly be. I just think I owe that to you all. And we were pretty honest in 2023. When Beck emerged, I think I said on the show that I'm actually pretty surprised. He is a more mature, just kind of a little bit more buttoned up than I thought he might be. He really won me over. And I would say that during the 2 years that he played at Georgia, he was mostly good. I mean, even after the 2024 season, I'm still glad Georgia had him. He came back in the game against Texas. I think that's commendable. He played, one of his best college games may have been the Tech game. There were a lot of moments in which I was mostly glad that Georgia had Carson Beck. But this was not a great quarterback prospect. And I can only imagine that the large sum of money Georgia spent on Beck, I would imagine privately they probably don't think that was money well spent, if I'm guessing. Uncle Lou says, remember when Carson Beck winked? Oh, that was great. I loved that. Like I said, there was a lot of time in which I was happy that Beck was here. And that video was awesome. And that was kind of a cool thing. I don't know. Sometimes short videos can be misleading. And I don't know that the level of confidence that Beck showed in the halftime wink against South Carolina, which became an SEC network video that we certainly made a big deal about on this show. I don't know that the actual confidence from Beck was as prodigious as that short video made it appear to be. Lou says that I hyped Beck like he was Joe Montana. I did 2 straight hours on him winking. As I said before, we liked it. And I do think we've been pretty fair with both the good and the bad moments when it comes to Carson Beck. Even right now, what I've said is I was mostly glad that Georgia had him. I was mostly glad that Georgia had him. I think I've been pretty clear about that. And I certainly celebrated his contribution to Georgia at the end of this season. I'd say this is a nuanced conversation. Nuance not always an easy thing to do. I would say this is a nuanced conversation. And I feel like I don't know there's anything we've ever said about Beck that I would take back. I don't think. Now, if you played something for me, maybe I might regret it. I think I called him a hero on X one time. I might take that back. The DGD thing, I don't really want to get into that right now. But I don't think there's too much on Beck that I would go back and take back. The wink against South Carolina was fun. That was fun. That was a fun moment. Won't apologize for having fun. That was a fun moment. Did the totality of the performance equal the promise of a brief video? Perhaps it didn't. Let's see what else. Let me get some Facebook comments here for a moment. Of course, don't forget Before the Hedges presented by Kroger later on this evening. In-home visits. This is the time of year when Before the Hedges really can't miss content. You've got in-home visits for Jared Curtis taking place, next few days. He commits on Monday, so the visits are this week. And obviously more on Jackson Cantwell, you would presume. All of that is getting ready to go down. Pete Williams, the subject of sort of following the footsteps of Stetson Bennett. Yeah, that's not an easy thing to do. But it's also one of those things where, for the most part, the Stetson career has also been sort of, I think, reimagined a little bit too. Bennett was pretty consistently good through 2 years, but the feeling that Georgia fans have about him dramatically changed at the conclusion of his career there as well. And I do think in the wake of that, like Bennett, for somehow, some way, the kind of coolness that he would put on display during like little short videos, things like that, he did seem to kind of authentically live into that. And I think that made him very popular. And I do think that Carson had a hard time matching that authenticity. I do think you're right about that. I do think that. Robert Brown says, after Stetson, we expected a lot more from a quarterback. That's probably true. But I think it's also true that Georgia built itself around a quarterback. I mean, we're led to believe they gave him a lot of money. That's money that wasn't used on something else. That Georgia, even with Bennett becoming a Heisman finalist in 2022, it's like, the Heisman's such a symbolic award. Did anybody really think that Stetson was Georgia's best player in 2022? Because he wasn't. I mean, he was great, and I love him, but he wasn't Georgia's best player. He wasn't even their best offensive player. He wasn't better than Brock Bowers, wasn't better than Jalen Carter. He was one of the very good players on this Georgia roster. He played the most important position and played big in some big moments. That gave him some additional symbolic value. But Bennett was always kind of one of the things that Georgia had going on. Georgia was always an ensemble cast in the Stetson-Bennett era, even though Bennett became super famous. I would say that the Beck era was a little bit of a different kind of Georgia team. Last year was meant to be a lot more about Carson Beck. This was meant to be a much more quarterback-driven team than it had ever been before. It's the first time that Georgia had ever had, a true projected first-round pick as its starting quarterback. Now, Fromm at one point in time had gotten some buzz about that, but that was like early mock drafts. That wasn't necessarily, the prevailing wisdom. But Beck was the moment in which Georgia had the projected first-round pick and even a very high first-round pick returning a quarterback. Last year was intended to be a quarterback-led team, and it didn't quite work out that way. Matt Rukavina bouncing around here a little bit. Let's see what else. Randy Hall says Stetson Bennett was a much better leader than Carson Beck. Perhaps that's the case. I do think I put a lot of value into players think. I do. And for better or worse, the players just seem to like Stetson Bennett better, and they seem to like Gunnar Stockton better. Now, that doesn't always guarantee what we want it to guarantee, but players know. Players know. They know something anyway. Let's see what else. Bill Sanders says the laughter at Ole Miss bothered me the most. Do get that. I would also say that sometimes those little moments in which you kind of get captured on video, like every now and then I'll see a picture of myself and I'm like, man, that's an awful picture. I just look bad in the picture. Just wish I looked better. Every now and then when you're captured and you don't necessarily mean to be, you're oftentimes captured in a way you don't really want to be. Like the laughter with, I guess it was Jaden Rashad, it did not look good. But I tried not to make too much of a thing out of that. I know where you're coming from on that. I tried not to make too much of a thing about that. Taking a jab at Jay Shipes from the Facebook side. That's very funny. But I think there was an accusation a moment ago that we're only now saying bad things about Beck because he's gone. Honestly, we've tried not to do that. We've really tried not to do that. And like I said before, I mean, even in the lead up to the Sugar Bowl when the whole world was in love with a guy that we also really like too, in Gunnar Stockton, I think we were pretty good even during that time of saying, say what you want about Beck, but he's going to leave big shoes to fill in a game like this. We've really tried not to. I mean, I do this show every day. I've done it for 10 years. If I come on here and say a bunch of stuff that 3 months later I'm having to take back or say the exact opposite of, something tells me I'm not going to last 10 years doing that. Let's see what else. Jeremy Arbin says, I believe in Stetson Bennett the moment he got the job in 2021. See, I'd love to say I knew that was true. I'll tell you when I believed in Bennett. I believed in Bennett when Nolan Smith said he believed in Bennett. And that's what it sort of comes down to for me, is like a guy that's laying his life on the line every single play, every single game. You know, Nolan Smith, after that Florida game, in which Stetson did not play well, said, that's my quarterback. At a time in which a lot of people thought that Georgia should maybe be playing JT Daniels, and thought that somehow Kirby Smart, through, once again, another example of people think Kirby's stubborn, but, you know, the world sort of moves in Kirby's direction every now and then. You know, Nolan Smith, knowing that JT Daniels was on the roster, said, that's my quarterback. At that point in time, that's who I chose to believe. Like, one of my very closely held beliefs is there are a lot of people who are closer to it and know more than I do. And when someone who's closer to it, knows more than I do, says something emphatic, I'm assuming they're coming from a real and honest place. And so that's what that was. Wildman Slayer and the subject sitting on the bench by himself. Yeah, is it the movie Draft Day where, like, is that what it is? Where, like, nobody came to his birthday party or something like that? You know, I don't know. I also think as somebody who's kind of known a lot of players, look, players are like no different than anybody else. They get mad at each other sometimes and they just sort of get over it. You know what I'm saying? It's like you can't stay mad forever, especially guys. Guys, like, I don't know, maybe, you know, guys just don't stay mad forever. You just sort of get over it and move on. Sometimes. Oh, by the way, speaking of former dogs and new homes, Pete Williams and Octavius talking about this. So Eric Gilbert is back in football again, going to play for Savannah State here this year. Yeah, Octavius Oliver mentioning that. And, you know, listen, continue to say, I hope it works out for him. I really do. I know that was a very complicated situation. And I'm telling you right now, from a high school standpoint, you go back and watch some of that high school film, that's about as good as anybody's going to see. That is a really, really dazzling prospect. And I just think that was a very complicated situation for him, and I don't think it was anybody's fault. I really don't. I don't think it was anybody's fault. I don't think. Just, I don't know, man. Just a tough situation. But one of the great high school prospects that I'd seen, I thought he was a ton of fun. And, you know, wanting to come to Georgia the first time, was thrilled when he came to Georgia on that transfer. Just not meant to be, apparently. And you hate that. Let us see what else. Anything else before we go? Peter Wilson says, did I watch Draft Day? I actually haven't. I don't think I've seen the movie. Although I'm a pretty big fan of the Kevin Costner sports movies. For some reason, I've never sat down to watch Draft Day. But I like a lot of the Costner sports movies. I love, obviously, Field of Dreams. That's an all-time movie for me. And I really love, is it For the Love of the Game, the one where he plays Billy Chapel? I love that movie. I know that a lot of people sort of think that's like a rom-com, but Vin Scully in that movie is amazing, just amazing. I mean, that's a great rewatch, a really, really fun movie. And it's also one of those things like, you know, my wife and I, like a lot of couples, I would say that we have very different taste in movies, like very different taste in movies. It's also one we could kind of watch together and both be pretty happy with, which is sort of nice. All right, let us see. Anything else? Yeah, Brian Whitaker mentioned For the Love of the Game. I really like that one. Bill Sanders says, I love rom-coms. I don't get to watch very many movies at all anymore. I kind of miss movies. I feel like that's one of those things. I know there's been some chatter about this lately. I sort of miss movies. I'm not even sure when the last time I went to a movie theater was. Now I also have the world's worst ADD, get distracted real easy. So if people are like chomping their popcorn or like messing with some sort of candy wrapper or like with their straw, I think that's going to drive me crazy. So it doesn't take much for me to realize, oh, yeah, this is why movie theaters are going out of style. But the idea of the big, dark movie theater, big screen, feels like an experience. I kind of miss that. There's not a lot of movies I want to see anymore. I think a lot of things that would have been good movies get turned into like prestige TV series and stuff like that, streaming series. But gosh, like some of that stuff's like 12 hours long. Like that's a major commitment. It'll take me 3 years to watch some of that stuff. There's just something to be said for, can you tell me a good story in 2 hours? Can you get me out of here in an hour 45? There's something to be said for that. Anyway, we gotta get ready to go. DawgNation.com one more time, then we're out of here. Bill Camacho checking out, appreciate that. DT mentioning Francoeur is one of the best combinations of football and baseball. Pretty close to it. Became obviously a very, young Major League Baseball prodigy, but would have been a major college prospect. I guess would have gone to Clemson. Saw him play high school football, defensive back, wide receiver, very, very good. Really came close to being, like just sort of the golden child Major League prospect. We talked about this yesterday about how, like if you're not a first-round pick in the NFL, that sort of money you'll never get back. Francoeur, unfortunately, is an example of that. And he played major leagues for a while, but in an arbitration situation, he turned down a free agent contract to avoid arbitration. Thought he could get more. This was like good, like 8-figure money. Turned it down, thinking he could get more from the arbitration stuff, and his career just didn't pan out that way. He probably cost himself millions of dollars because, unfortunately, the career didn't match like the early promise. But he went on to play for a good long while too, and obviously still very beloved here in Atlanta, as I think that he should be. All right, way to go. Good stuff. Thank you all for being here. We got to go for now. Go check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that today, including we got warm weather coming. Get your AC unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Find them online, rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. We will see you back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will talk to you then.